Hey everyone, this is Bill Krieger from the Veterans Archives podcast, where we preserve and share the incredible stories of our nation's heroes. Catch us every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern on Wreaths Across America Radio, or stream anytime on Buzzsprout, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Really, anywhere you choose to get your podcast, you should be able to find us. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on social media to help us reach more veterans and supporters. We are a nonprofit, and this service is completely free for veterans. Every story matters, and every voice deserves to be heard. Spread the word, honor our heroes, and join us on this mission. Follow, share, and tune in, because their story should never be forgotten. Learn more at veteransarchives.org. We'll see you there. Today is Wednesday, August 13th, 2025. We're here with Michael Scott, who served the United States Army. So good morning, Michael.
Good morning. How are you today?
Great. Yourself?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. I'm glad you could join me this morning. It's kind of early, 8 o'clock, but military guys don't usually sleep in anyway, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I'd give my right arm to sleep until like noon.
You and me both. I'm still up early, even on a Saturday morning.
Yeah, I'm up at 6 o'clock wandering around the house, No one's up till like 9, 10 o'clock. So
certainly.
All right. Well, let's start out really simple. When and where were you born?
So I was born in West Branch, Michigan. It's a couple hours north of Detroit. Ogemaw County, very small, poor county. There's probably about 20,000 people that live in the entire county. So very rural, northern Michigan. I was born there, raised there, and I was there until the time I joined the Army.
Okay. So, it's interesting because sometimes I talk to people who are like born somewhere and then it's just they move 20 different places. So it's kind of interesting to talk to someone who's like stayed in the same town for all that time. Talk to me about what it was like growing up in a small town.
I think, I didn't know any different. That was back in the 70s and 80s, so we didn't have the information we did now. I didn't realize how small my world was. Later, after I joined the Army, it opened my eyes to a whole new world. But growing up there, my father had been in the Army. Both of my uncles had been in the Army as well. My grandfather had served in the Army in World War II. So to me, it seemed like I always knew I was going in the Army. I don't know when I made that decision, but as early as 9 years old, I remember seeing one of my dad's old khaki uniforms with the yellow stripes on the sleeve and thinking that was just the coolest thing in the world. My uncle had been in Vietnam, and he used to wear his old field jacket with the first Cav patch on his right shoulder. And, again, it was just, to me, it was just amazing. I didn't really understand much about it other than I knew that's something I wanted to do.
Okay. So that's really in your family then.
Yeah. I guess, when I think back on it now, it's just what it meant to be a man to me was, every man I knew that I respected had served in the Army. So it almost seemed like destiny to me that I would eventually join the Army.
Okay. Any brothers and sisters?
I have 3 brothers. 2 of them served as well. My older brother actually went in the Air Force, so he did 9 years in the Air Force. I'm not sure why he chose that other than the Army, but I think he knew he wanted to do something in the military as well. And then my little brother, half brother, he went in the Army and he was an Apache pilot, but just missed Iraq. So he was a total of 6 years in, I believe.
Okay. All right. And where did you fit in the pecking order?
So my older brother was the one that did the Air Force. Mm-hmm. He was 3 years older than me. Then I was next. My stepbrother was a year younger. He did not serve, but my half-brother was 9 years younger than me, and he's the one that was the Apache pilot.
Okay, so there wasn't really a point in time where there were like 4 little boys running around the house then.
No, it was a very, we had the 2 different families, so it was just mostly my older brother and myself with my mother most of the time.
Okay. Well, tell me about your mom.
So she was just a working woman. She worked as a bank teller for pretty much her whole life. Hardworking. I think she raised us to just be respectful, and I think she was proud of both my brother and I that we joined the military and that we did the things we did. So, it was tough, I think, because she was both mom and dad at the same time most of the time. But she did the best she could. She wasn't educated, neither was my father. So, I went to school later in life, but again, our world was just very small. So that was all we really knew at that time.
Yeah. So did your mom remarry at all?
She never remarried, no.
Okay. All right. And then tell me a little bit more about your father. Now, I know that he served in the military, but what about him as you were growing up?
So he had served with the 25th Infantry Division in Hawaii. So again, to me, that was, I had no concept of what that was other than I wanted to do something similar to that. He was a radio operator in the military. But after, as long as I remember, he worked for Consumers Energy. He was a lineman for years, so just hardworking, good guy. He's a very devout Christian, so good, strong morals. And, again, when I looked at his military service, I was just super proud that my dad had served in the military, and I wanted to be a lot like him.
Okay. All right. Now, how old were you when your parents split up then?
I was just 5.
Okay.
So I was pretty young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How'd that impact, though, the rest of your growing up, do you think?
It definitely caused, anytime you have a broken home, it caused a rift in the family, but I don't think it ever changed, what I wanted to do. But it definitely, it had a strong impact on my own development as a young man, I think. I think I kind of rebelled against everybody for the longest time, and the Army helped me kind of reel some of that in eventually.
Or at least refocus it, right?
Yeah, well, you don't really have a choice to be a rebel when you're an enlisted man, so.
That's true. That's very true. So, I know you were talking about how West Branch is kind of a small town, not a lot of money there, but it sounds like both your parents worked. Your dad worked for Consumers Energy. Did that give you a different lifestyle than some of your friends? Or, how did that work out?
I would say we were very middle of the road up there. There were certainly people that had a lot less than we did. And there were certainly people that had a lot more than we did. But, it isn't a place where people are known for having a lot of money. So even the people that had money, it's not the kind of money you think of.
Right.
But, I think, again, we didn't know any different. We'd go hunt rabbits and, play on the railroad tracks and all the dumb things kids did back in those days. And for the most part, life was pretty good.
Okay. Well, in newsflash, us city kids, because I grew up right here in Lansing, when you talk about playing on the railroad tracks and all that stuff, we did all that too. That's interesting to me.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So tell me about school. What do you remember about going to school, and how did you do?
So I think with my parents getting divorced, I had a period where I was really a troublemaker at school.
Mm-hmm.
I think as I neared high school, I reeled that in a little bit, and I was doing pretty well. I think once I got my driver's license and I knew I was joining the Army, I started to not care, and my grades really tanked towards the end, but I did pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
I just I knew college wasn't for me. Again, no one in my family had gone to college. They all went in the military. They were hardworking people, and that was just the route I seemed destined for at that time.
Okay. Do you have any good, troublemaking stories you want to share? Maybe one that sticks out in your mind.
I can't think of any specifically, other than in the 4th grade, I remember Mrs. Green. I was singing Popeye the Sailor Man lives in a frying pan. He turned on the gas, burned his ass, and I don't remember how it ends, but she was not impressed with my little antics. So I ended up sitting in the corner the rest of the day, but I was never really a horrible troublemaker, just more of a smart ass, a little bit of a rebel.
Yeah. That was one of my favorite songs when I was in about 4th or 5th grade. That's kind of funny. I thought that like we were the only school that had that one, but apparently that was universal.
It must have made it up north too.
I guess so. So I'm just curious, coming from a divorced family myself, when your parents split, did you see them both on a regular basis? I mean, I know how it was for me. I'm just wondering how it was for you.
Yeah, we did, but my brother and I spent the majority of time with my mother.
Mm-hmm.
My father kind of had his new family, and even though he only lived a block away, we just didn't spend that much time together. I think, with any divorce, there's my mother and father loved and hated each other at the same time, how that works. And I think neither one of them ever got over it. And, they were never able to even sit in the same room together, even as I was an adult. But so I think there was a period there where it was just easier if we weren't around my dad's house. And it just, it caused some rift between me and my father for a lot of years, but fortunately we were able to kind of repair that later on in life. So,
well, all right. Sounds very familiar to me.
Yeah, it's the same old story. Often, the pattern isn't all that different when you have a broken home like that.
Right. But when you're the kid, it doesn't matter if it's happening to other people, it's happening to you, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So you, sounds like you made it through high school, possibly by the skin of your teeth.
I graduated with a 2.5 grade point average, so it wasn't horrible, but it wasn't great by any means.
We wouldn't call it stellar.
No, it was not. And honestly, I think I was more intelligent than I realized, so I could skate by pretty easily. With minimal effort, I could get a C. So, and I was pretty much giving minimal effort.
You just knew what you had to do to get it done.
Exactly. Yep.
I used to have a guy that I went to school with when I was in the Navy, and he would always just do whatever it took just to get by. And he was always petty officer minimum standard.
That's funny.
Yeah. So you graduate high school, and did you go into the delayed entry program? Or did you just ship out right away? How'd that work?
I went in delayed entry program at 17. So I graduated in December or January, a little bit early. Knowing that I was going in the military, I decided to take a little bit of time off before I went in. I had enough credits for high school, and I'd kind of disengaged already. So I graduated half year. I was working in a local sawmill, just making a little bit extra cash and hanging out and drinking and doing all the things teenage kids do. And then August of 1988 is when I went in. So just about 28 years ago. Yes, if my math is working correctly.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah. For me, it was like 40 years ago, but we won't talk about that.
38 years ago. I can't do my math.
Oh, you're right. It's that carry one that always gets me.
Exactly.
So you knew you were going to go in the Army then, right?
Yes. Yeah. I knew I was going in. And I had been working with a couple other people on farms and construction. So I'd talked to a couple other guys that I knew in the Army as well. And I knew I wanted to be Army Airborne. And one guy told me about being an engineer, and it just seemed like something I really wanted to do. So, I scored really well on the ASVAB, and all I wanted to do was jump out of airplanes and blow things up. So they gave me my wish.
Yeah, because that's pretty much what you're going to do, right?
Yes, exactly.
So you go in, you get all signed up. How long were you in delayed entry then, total?
Probably 8 months.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think it was December or January when I think it was December when we did the delayed entry. I remember sitting around the table in my house on 4th Street with my mother, and she had to sign as well. So it was interesting when I think back on that.
Yeah, how was she okay with this?
I think she was both proud and a little worried, as mothers are. I think I was her baby, so I was the last one out of the house. I'm sure that had a big impact on her because she wasn't married. She didn't have anyone else in her life at that time. So I think it was a big step, both for me and her when I took off and went to the military.
Yeah. So now, where'd you go to basic?
So I did 1 unit training in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. So Fort Lost in the Wood, as it's often called.
Oh yeah.
It was it's a brutal environment down there. I believe it was about 100 degrees on the day I arrived, and it was about 10 degrees when we were doing training in November. So
yeah, there's some. It definitely has some mood swings down there, doesn't it?
For sure.
Now, what was it like for you? Stepping off the bus into basic training. Were you prepared for this because your family had told you, or were you not prepared for this?
I don't know if anyone's prepared for it. I certainly was not. I had only flown one time prior to hopping on the airplane and going to St. Louis, Missouri. And then they throw you on a bus and take you down to Fort Leonard Wood. And, as soon as you hop off, people are screaming at you and you're getting your hair all cut off. And, I had nice long hair back then, and it's just it's surreal. And I think that's part of the indoctrination process, obviously, where they kind of break you down. But I don't know that any 18-year-old boy is ready for that.
A little bit of shock and awe when you get there, huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Were you like rubbing your head for quite a while?
I'm quite sure I did. And I think they gave you a choice of 1/8 inch or no hair. And it's like, does it really matter at that point?
Yeah. What's the difference between 1/8 of an inch and no hair at all? Yeah. We used to get yelled at in boot camp for rubbing our heads because apparently it would irritate your scalp. I don't know. Anyway,
it's funny.
That's why I asked. But anything stick out in your mind about basic training? Like, are there some things that happened there that you're like, anytime you think about boot camp, that's what you think about?
I don't really think about boot camp a whole lot. It was tough. I think the 1 unit training, it was basically like 13 weeks of basic training. So, I hear other people go to their AIT and it got a little easier. I don't feel like it ever happened that way for us. The drill sergeants in that 1 unit training like that are just, they're drill sergeants for 13 weeks. So I think we got a weekend off and then it was right back to business. But, blending the two together, you'd go on a ruck march all day long, and then you'd build a bridge and you'd ruck back to the barracks. And they also found out I was going to airborne school, so they would run me at night because evidently if you failed airborne, it was a reflection on them as well. So, being dumb enough to go in the airborne, I got to do extra PT. Mm-hmm. I was a skinny kid, probably 135 pounds when I joined the Army. So anytime we would line up for chow, if there was a bigger guy in front of me, they would take his dessert and put it on my plate. So I quickly learned to, squeeze up next to a bigger guy whenever I was in line because I knew I was going to get double desserts.
Nice.
So I guess
nice.
that did stand out to me.
That's the Army's way of load leveling, right?
Yes, exactly.
That's great. So you never really left boot camp for AIT then. It was just all an extension of all of that. Yeah. So you get done with that. Did you come home after AIT then?
I went straight to airborne school at Fort Benning, Georgia. So we hopped on a bus and, drove throughout the night, however many hours it took us. It felt like forever. We stopped somewhere, Memphis, I believe, Tennessee, and then continued on down. We got there in the early morning hours, and it was definitely different because nobody was screaming at you to get off the bus, but, it's still... They showed us our barracks and where we would be and, report first thing in the morning. So it was definitely a weird transition for me because, I wasn't used to regular Army and, I was still saying, yes, specialist, to people. And it was just kind of people like, okay, take that down a notch, would you?
Right. You can always tell the new guy, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was definitely the FNG at that time. So.
Yeah, and if you know with the FNG, we're not going to tell people what that means. but yeah, exactly. So, there's a common theme in the Army, and that is like, okay, you went from Fort Leonard Wood to Fort Benning, but it's like out of the frying pan into the fire, because I know Benning is just hot as heck almost 10 months out of the year.
Oh yeah, it was definitely warm there. Although that would have been late November, early December when I got there. So the days were hot, but it would get a little cooler at night. So you'd get a little reprieve from some of the heat. There were no air conditioned barracks back then. So, you'd at least get a little cooler in the evening in the barracks. But it was just anyone who's been through airborne school, a lot of running. They love to run. So we'd get up and run 7 miles every morning. I remember, I believe it was on the first day, if I remember, and they'd say, look to your left, look to your right, because one of those guys won't be standing there when you're done. I don't remember if I said it out loud, but I certainly was like, it's not going to be me. And I knew that. And, whenever anyone tells me they're going airborne or special forces, just failure can't be an option. And for me, airborne school, failing was just never going to be an option. So I ended up spraining my ankle in week 1. I went to the PX and bought some wrap and some Asper cream. And every morning I would wrap it as tight as I could, and I would go for a run, because you didn't want to tell anyone you're injured or you get recycled. And I certainly didn't want to spend any more time at airborne school than I had to.
Right. And, I think people hear like, I got up and I ran 7 miles, or I rucked 20 miles, or whatever it is you did in the military. A lot of us did it. That your body will do what your mind tells it to do. It's not a matter, you have to be physically fit, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's a matter of physical fitness. It's really a matter of, do you have the tenacity to make it through?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I'm not a big guy. I've never been the biggest, strongest guy. But in every school I've done, whether it was airborne, mountain warfare school, psychological operations selection, just quitting was never an option for me. Mm-hmm. There's always going to be someone faster, stronger, bigger. But if you don't give up, you don't quit. Your body will carry you through a lot more than you realize.
Right. So you're going through airborne school, watching the guy on the left and right fall out, and does it have a fairly high failure rate then?
At that time, it was about 1/3, 25% to 33% failure rate. I don't know if it's still that difficult these days, but we had a pretty good fail rate, and they would just play mental games with you. I remember one morning, it was quite warm. They just left us at attention for an hour, standing in the hot Georgia sun. And then the sergeant airborne came out with a glass of cold water, and it was dripping sweat off of it. And he said, "Who wants to quit today? Just come on in. We have cold water, cold ice cream." And sure enough, some people dropped out of formation and walked right up there. And it just, to me, you could stand me in the sun all day. I'd have to fall out and pass out before I was quitting.
Right. Your drink of water will come from an IV bag, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So how long's airborne school?
3 weeks. Okay. So, there was a little lead up. I think I was there 3.5 weeks, just because you're getting into the barracks and everything. But you have a ground week, where you're learning parachute landing falls, a tower week where you're jumping out of towers and falling off the 250-foot tower at Benning. And then final week is jump week, where you do your 5 jumps out of either a C-130 or a 141.
So I think a lot of civilians listening to this, that kind of blows their mind. Like 3 weeks from I've never even seen a parachute to I'm jumping out of a plane now. I don't think people realize how compressed things are. Like, it's very intense.
Yeah. Any of those schools that you go through, but the Army, the military, they keep you moving. Mm-hmm. And there's long days, 12, 14-hour days, however long it takes to get everybody through. That's what it's going to be. So a lot of training in a short period of time. I was kind of terrified of heights. So Tower Week was like horrible for me. I remember I was one of the last people to actually pass because every time I would jump out of the tower, I just and I mean, I would do everything wrong because I was terrified.
Yeah.
And I remember the sergeant airborne with his clipboard. He looked down at it. He looked up at me with his condescending eyes and was, "Get back up there and do that again." So I eventually got it right. But to your point, it didn't matter if I was there for 2 hours or 12 hours. We were either going to get it right or I was going to quit, and I wasn't going to quit. So
yeah. And did they play the game too? Like I remember a lot of times you're going to go on a 7-mile run and you get done with your 7-mile run and they wave you through like, "Oh, we're doing another mile," because the idea was that just because you think it's over doesn't mean it's over, and you better have a little gas left in your tank. Did they do kind of stuff like that when you were there?
Oh, yeah, they absolutely did that. Now that you mentioned that, I remember that you were supposed to hit the finish line, but they would continue on up to the hangars and just run you another half mile or so just to see who would drop out because, again, it's a mental game. They're trying to see who's strong enough to stay in. I believe you could only fall out of 2 runs and you would fail the school. So again, if you break people's spirit, they think they're done and you push them a little further. And there were definitely people who would fall out because they had already set in their mind that they were going to stop at 7 miles.
Yeah. The other thing, I want to go back to Tower Week real quick. The other thing I think the military does is makes you face your fears, right? Like you don't have time to be afraid of heights. You're scared shitless, right? Yeah. But you have time to be afraid of heights. And how does that shape you later on, right?
It definitely had a huge impact on me. I think even to this day, if something scares me, I do it just because I see that as a weakness and I have to get better at that. I talk about all the time with people at work. I do a lot of presentations now. I've been in learning and development for years, but I ended up getting a D- in communications in high school. I was terrified of speaking in front of people. So when I got into the professional world, I forced myself to get up and speak in front of people just because, if it's a weakness of mine, something I'm not comfortable with, I'll actually push myself to do that. I don't love spiders, so I'm not going to go lay in a bathtub full of spiders, but anything like that I find fearful, I continue to challenge myself. I go for hikes in the mountains all the time. So I don't love standing on the edge of a cliff and I won't do it on purpose, but I'm not going to miss out on a hike just because it's near a cliff.
Right. Well, and isn't there a certain amount of, I don't know, like a little bit of adrenaline rush you get from doing stuff that just scares the hell out of you? Yeah.
And I think, I tell people all the time, the military was the best and the worst thing that ever happened to me because from the ages of 18 to 21, I just had this heightened sense of purpose and I got to experience things that were just incredible. I think you have to find a way later in life to fuel that adrenaline in a positive way. And right. It doesn't always work that well for all of us.
Sometimes we find a negative way to do it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about that. So you get through airborne school. I wouldn't say get through, like you got through it. What happens next?
So I went home. I did a month of leave at home. I was home for Christmas, which was nice. And then I believe it was around January 9th. I don't remember the exact date that I ended up being sent to Germany. If you recall, they ask you, where do you want to be stationed? I don't remember what I put stateside, but I remember for my overseas station, I put Korea and Hawaii, and they sent me to Germany. So, they don't really care what you want. It's the Army's needs first. So yeah. I ended up in Germany. Wasn't my first choice, but absolutely, in hindsight, love the opportunity that I had to be in Germany for a couple of years.
Yeah, I think we all have that story about this is what we asked for and this is what we got. But the great thing is, you're absolutely right. Like all those things I got that I didn't ask for, they were great.
Yeah,
like I didn't think it was so great at the time, but they were great. Right. So how long were you in Germany?
So I arrived in January of 89. We arrived shortly after the Rhine mine bombings in 88. So when I first arrived there, they took me to Smith Kaserne in Aschaffenburg, Germany. And there was a bulldozer and a 113 with a 50 cal mounted on top at the front gate. And I was like, where the hell did they send me? This is more like Beirut than Germany. But it was just a heightened sense of security at that time. So I spent 2 years in Aschaffenburg. The engineers, we had our own caserne. They're not like big military bases here in the U.S. They're kind of scattered throughout the cities in Germany. At least they were at that time. A lot of those have closed since. But we had a local training area nearby that we used to go to and do a lot of training at. But at that time, 1989, it was still East and West Germany. Right. So later in January, there was Reforger 1989, which was a big show of force against the Eastern Bloc Soviet Union countries. So we did maneuvers on the Czechoslovakian border, and again, a dumb kid from northern Michigan, all of a sudden I'm standing on the Czechoslovakian border, looking through a pair of binoculars at a Russian guard looking back at me 1,000 meters away. And it was just surreal. People talk about the Cold War, and it's still hard to explain to people what that meant, because there was just this constant tension in Europe, and to see this 25-foot tall fence with Russian guards on the other side was just, it was a lot to take in at 18.
Yeah. Did you get the sense that that guy across the fence maybe felt the same way you did?
I don't think so. The Russians were really good at posturing. Yeah. And I feel like every soldier they put on the front was 6'2", blonde, just built like a brick shit house, for lack of a better term. Right. And I mean, they were really good at just being stoic and looking like they were in control. Mm-hmm. I'm sure to them I was just this puny little kid on the other side that they were chuckling at, but it was a very interesting thing to see. And then if we fast forward to November of that same year, that's when we woke up one morning and we're watching AFN in the barracks, Armed Forces Network, the worst television ever.
Absolutely.
But it was all we had to watch. And we were witnessing people tearing holes in the Berlin Wall while Russian guards were watching it. And it was just unbelievable, because it was like a week before you had been shot for doing something like that. So it was actually my buddy Joe Jammer, who was from Ogama County as well. Uh-huh. We ended up in the engineer unit on the same day, oddly enough. So we'll talk more about that. But small town, we ended up in the same unit, and he said, we need to go to Berlin. So that day we went down to our office and put in for a 3-day leave. And the next weekend, we hopped in a car and we drove through the Russian corridor into East Germany, into Berlin. And we walked through the Berlin Wall into East Berlin, where there were Russian guards standing everywhere. So we didn't spend much time there. We turned around, walked back through the wall. But I have a picture of me sitting on top of the Berlin Wall, and I have a big chunk of the Berlin Wall that I pulled off myself. I found a chunk of rebar on the wall, and I started working it until a piece came off, and that still sits in my cabinet at home.
Wow. I mean, I remember watching it on TV. I can't even imagine being there. Like, that's the definition of surreal, right?
It really was, yeah. And, it's so hard to explain, like even driving across East Germany, just the oppression, the lack of signs. You see a gas station off of the road. There, it was just barren, and you would see a little town off in the distance. Of course, we weren't allowed to go to any of those, but the fact that there was no advertising at all, mm-hmm. and you'd see a East German police officer pull up next to you, and he'd just glare at you, and it was terrifying. And people lived this life every day. When we went into East Berlin, we stepped in a little shop, and it looked like it was from the 1800s. It was just shelves with a few cans and bread.
Yeah.
We said Guten Morgen, and they looked over at the Russian officer like, we don't even want to talk to these Americans. It was pretty obvious we were Americans.
Right.
So we didn't feel welcome by anybody. So again, we didn't spend too much time in East Berlin, but it was just unbelievable. And it's hard to explain because there's nothing like it, save for maybe North Korea on the earth today that's like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think people misunderstand the effect of communism on a country. I remember going to Romania in 87, and the people there were starving, but there were fields just full of produce, right? But it was all going to the Russians.
Right.
And the people that lived there weren't getting anything.
Yeah, it was definitely strange, and I think in 1990 the two Germanys reunited, and the East Germans were just so happy to be out from under the Russian control. To your point, I think the daily oppression that people went through was just more than most of us could ever imagine.
Yeah, exactly. So were they not like? So I got to ask this question because of the way the Army works, right? Were they not concerned about giving you a pass to go there? Because really all hell was breaking loose, and
it was, so there were a lot of protocols we had to file, and evidently I didn't know it then, but we did have some status of forces agreement with the Russians.
Okay.
And when we went to the Russian corridor, there was a U.S. consulate, I guess, with a military attache there. And they basically told us, make sure our gas tank is full. We won't be stopping anywhere between here and East Berlin. So as we made it through East Germany, we weren't allowed to get off the freeway. And if we were threatened with arrest and detention until we would be brought back to the U.S. military. And then we would actually be court-martialed by the U.S. military for not following orders. So it was very strict guidelines, and I think that status of forces agreement kind of, again, they call it the Cold War for a reason, because we weren't actively at war, but we weren't going to tolerate any shenanigans from either side.
Yeah, exactly. So you, how long were you then in Germany at this point? Or
so I was there just shy of 2 years when. Well, the wall came down. I'd been there about less than a year.
Okay.
And then about a year and a half is when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and that kind of changed things quite a bit. There were maybe 6 to 8 months where it felt like the world was just at peace. Again, the wall had come down. It was a surreal situation. They were talking about downsizing our military at that time. And in August of 1990, Saddam Hussein decided to invade Kuwait. And I didn't know it at that time, but within a month, our unit was starting to spin up and get ready to deploy there.
Okay. Before we get there, I do want to ask one other question. So you woke up in the morning and you saw the wall coming down. Was there any indication ahead of time that made you think this was going to happen?
Not really. Looking back on it, you can kind of see a little bit of when Reagan went there and Gorbachev and him were getting along well. And it's Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. But, from my point of view, I arrived in January. And again, I'm looking across at a Russian guard. And even up until November, I didn't see it as a possibility. I was just in shock when I saw it on AFN that they weren't actually shooting people for ripping the wall down.
Yeah.
It seemed to change almost overnight.
Okay. I was just curious if you guys had heard rumblings. So So you're there, you get to see the wall come down, you get a little bit of, the olive branch, the doves are flying around, and all of a sudden, there's always going to be one idiot, right? And this time it's Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so what happens?
So he invades Kuwait, obviously, and the whole U.S. military starts spinning up. I think we sent 82nd Airborne was one of the first on the ground there. A couple Ranger battalions went in, and then the buildup just started happening like crazy. November, we got our orders that we were heading to Saudi Arabia, and I believe we left just a couple of days after Thanksgiving. Most of the families were allowed to go home and spend Thanksgiving with their families. I was alone in Germany, so obviously we had Thanksgiving at the Chow Hall.
Turkey roll.
Yeah, exactly. A dry turkey roll. And then I think I was on one of the advanced planes, if I recall correctly, advanced party. And even that was funny because at the time, I think it was South TWA, one of those airlines that no longer exists. We get on this big 747 and we're walking up the stairs onto the plane with all of our weapons. And I remember we had chartered it. The U.S. military had chartered it, but the stewardesses that were on there were just looking at us like, what the hell is happening? Because all these guys are coming on with weapons. We didn't have ammunition with us, but
right.
You're carrying weapons onto a plane and throwing M60s up into the luggage rack on top, and it was an interesting time to be a part of the U.S. military for sure.
I bet they still took your nail clippers though.
Yeah, I don't remember, but they probably did.
Yeah. So when you headed to Kuwait, where did you actually start out?
So we flew in to an airfield outside of Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, and then we hopped on some buses. We went to the docks in Dhahran. We spent a couple of weeks there waiting for our equipment to arrive because it was coming by naval vessel. So all of our M113s, we also had a heavy equipment platoon that had bulldozers and other heavy equipment that the engineers use. So we sat on the docks for about 2 weeks. It was hotter than Hades. Of course, it's Saudi Arabia. You get the humidity off the ocean, and you're on a blacktop all day long in the 100-degree heat. And it was a long 2 weeks sitting on the docks waiting for everything to show up.
Got you nice and acclimated, didn't it?
Oh, yes. So right away, you went from Germany to Saudi Arabia, and it quickly changed from maybe 70 degrees to 100 plus in no time.
Right. And nobody cares because you still have a job to do, right? Exactly. I mean,
and you have to be in full uniform at all times.
Of course. Full, did you guys have to have all your stuff on? But you're in Bahrain, right? So it's not really.
Bahrain was right across from Dhahran.
Okay.
So we were same general area, but the docks are right there across the causeway is Bahrain. So yes, we, in those days we were allowed to go down to t-shirts, and the LBE was a lot lighter. We'll talk about my second set of service, but later on when we had plate carriers and everything else, it was a lot more. The LBE wasn't horrible to wear back at that time, and we had summer uniforms that weren't soaked in permethrin, so there were some advantages, even though it was ungodly hot.
Right. Yeah, I guess you can take off as much as you want. It's not going to change how nice and warm it is. So your equipment finally arrives. What happened? Where do you head?
So once we get our equipment, we moved up to the Wadi al-Batin. Hafar al-Batin is a city north of there. And the locals actually called it hell because it's just the middle of nowhere and it's hot and nothing grows out there. If you can imagine a gravel road that just goes on for 100 miles, that's kind of what the terrain is out there. There's not a bush or a blade of grass that grows anywhere. And it was just, we set up in the middle of nowhere. We hadn't received GPS systems yet, so navigation was like impossible because there was no terrain features. So at nighttime, we would often triangulate cities in the distance because we could see their lights. And then that's how we would kind of guide throughout the day. But oftentimes we'd keep track of our miles as we were moving. And once we hit 10 miles, we'd start doing circles to find out where we were supposed to be, because, it was easy if you're off by a degree or two, there was nothing to navigate by out there.
Wow. No Blue Force track or anything like
Not in those days. We did eventually get Magellan handheld systems, which, again, that technology was new to us at that time, but it amazed us. We could get 3 or 4 satellites, and all of a sudden this little arrow would point us in the right direction. So
yeah, I can't even imagine that. When I deployed, we had all the cool stuff.
Yeah.
You were on the cutting edge of all of that.
I would equate it to being in the middle of the ocean. If you don't have anything to navigate by, really, all you have are the stars and the sun. And that's kind of how we felt when we first got there. Of course, we weren't equipped to navigate that way. We're used to terrain features and 8-digit grid to get us where we're going. So
yeah. Yeah, I never really kind of thought about it, but yeah, there's not a lot of terrain features, and they move in the desert. So where are you actually headed then, and how long did it take you to get there?
So Hafar al-Batin had to be at least a couple hours north. Some of our equipment we could ship with our 920 semi trucks, but the tracks, the M113s, we all had to drive up there, and they move at about 30 miles an hour. So it took us, it felt like all day to get up to where we were going. And then because we were an engineer unit, we pushed up berms around our area, and that was pretty much the only terrain features in the area at that time. By late December, the desert just exploded with little caserns like that. Units were just showing up daily. But when we first got out there, it was just absolutely nothing.
Right. No neighbors.
Not at all. No.
And so what was your mission then while you're there? Did they really not quite have one yet?
So when we look back on it, we were trying to do a show of force. So every what are the vehicle covers you put out? Are you talking about like the camo radar
nets?
Camo? So we set up camo nets everywhere, and we'd put them over top of anything, and it was basically to fool the Iraqis to show that we had more vehicles and more force than we actually had. So we would set up even little mock caserns and just put up camo nets. So we did that for a couple of months, but then after more units arrived, it was less important to do that. But initially, we were vulnerable because we didn't have the full force on the ground yet. And then once First Infantry got set up, we ended up being linked up with the First Infantry Division.
Okay, all right, and it sounds like the Iraqis didn't have the will or the force maybe that we thought that they had originally too.
That is for sure. We were told the Republican Guard was just going to destroy us.
Right.
So we were terrified, but we were expecting 20 to 30% losses because the Iraqi Republican Guard had been at war with Iran for years. So they were hardened troops, and they were really supposed to know what war meant and looked like. And our technology at that time was untested. We hadn't been to war for 20 plus years. So I think we didn't even know what our own capabilities were leading up to that war. Yeah.
I think we found out really quickly, as a matter of fact.
We did. Yes.
Yeah. So what was it like I don't want to say typical day because there's no such thing, but what was a day like once you got everyone kind of got there and you're now part of the 1st Infantry Division? What were you doing?
Most of the days, the heavy equipment platoons were really busy, so we were mostly supporting them because I was combat engineer, I was demolition specialist. But they were going to different areas and helping people set up berms and dig pit toilets and all that kind of stuff. But most of our day was spent on guard duty. We kept like 75% guard at all time because we thought there might be preemptive attacks by the Iraqis. They didn't happen except for a few small areas, like Kafji was one that people have heard about. But for the most part, the Iraqis didn't go on the offensive, which was probably very good for us because we would have been caught with our pants down early on. But most days were just boring, trying to stay out of the sun. We'd play volleyball, or you spent your time sitting on the berm, staring out into the darkness. I remember at nighttime, a lot of times I'd have the starlight scope mounted on top of my M16, and I would just kind of watch people smoking cigarettes around. It was really boring. So you just did what you could to amuse yourself.
Yeah. I think there's nothing worse than having bored soldiers, though. There's lots of ways to find trouble when that happens.
Absolutely. Well, the good news is, you were 20 miles from an electric pole, so
yeah,
there wasn't too much you could do to find trouble out there.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing. You're right. Now, how long were you there doing this?
So we probably spent the better part of a month up near Hafar al-Batin. Then January 16th, I think, is when the bombing started. And we had some artillery come in a few times, but for the most part, we'd just sit there at night and listen to the carpet bombing, and you just feel the whole earth shake. 2 weeks before the invasion, so that must have been early February, we moved up to the Iraqi berm.
Mm-hmm.
So there was this huge 40-foot berm between Iraq and Saudi Arabia that somebody had pushed up at some point. And that was kind of the border, if you will. It wasn't heavily guarded, but you could definitely tell where it was at.
Mm-hmm.
So we moved up on the border, and we spent a couple weeks up there. And when we moved up there, the shelling got a little more regular for us because we were a lot closer. You'd hear Iraqi drones come over at night. We could never spot them in the sky, but you'd hear them. And then the next day we'd get hit by artillery.
Mm-hmm.
So they would... the U.S. moved artillery batteries up behind us, and they quickly countered the Iraqi artillery and destroyed at least 75% of their artillery even before we went in February.
Okay. So let's talk about that then. What was it like to now finally move into Iraq? How was that?
So we were attached to 234 Armor, 1st Infantry Division, and as engineers, we cut holes through the berm with explosives and bulldozers, and we were kind of leading the charge to mark the lanes because the Iraqis had used a lot of landmines in those days. So engineers, part of our job is to cut lanes through. So we came under some pretty direct fire a couple of times, and we got through the first set of minefields. And after that, they actually brought M1s up that had tank plows on them, and they cut through the last few sections as we got closer to the actual tanks. So Battle of 73 Easting, I don't remember if that was the first day or the second day. Memory eludes me a little bit, but it might have been the first day of the war. We were part of that initial punch into the 48th Iraqi Infantry Division, I believe, is the one we chewed up initially.
Okay. Now, something, too, that I don't know that a lot of people realize is when you say engineering, a lot of people think engineering like, oh, I'm going to design a tower, or I'm going to build a building. And, from experience, the engineers, they're out there looking for IEDs and mines and clearing all that stuff out of the way, which I don't think a lot of people know or understand.
No, and it has changed a little bit over the years. To your point, modern engineers are more IED and route clearing.
Mm-hmm.
Back during Desert Storm, there were a lot more landmines than there were IEDs.
Right.
So that was our major focus, was cutting through the landmines. Once we got beyond that, it was using explosives to destroy bunkers, caches of weapons. We were used as light infantry several times just because of the speed with which we were moving. Obviously, with 113s, we couldn't take on a T-72 tank, so they would have us peel off and go into the light trench lines and kind of overwhelm the enemy on that front.
Okay. So you're like pretty close combat then.
Yeah. After we cut through the berm, it felt like we drove forever. I think it was 26 miles until we hit the first Iraqi tanks. And there was one M1 in front of me that was plowing through the minefield. We were probably only rolling about 5 miles an hour when I saw the tank rock, and off in the distance, I see this tiny little puff of smoke. And I knew he had hit a tank, and I would later learn it was almost 3 miles out that he hit that first Iraqi tank. So our technology was untested. I think that we were saying our max range was 1.5 miles back then, and we almost doubled that range. And one shot while rolling with the tank plow and direct hit. It was amazing.
Yeah, that's no small feat.
No. So we still had a couple miles to push forward. By then, all the M1s were opening up. Iraqi tanks were returning fire, but very minimal damage to anybody. I mean, you'd see them hitting the dirt, but they certainly didn't have the kind of range or technology that we had. I remember as we were going through there, I remember an Apache helicopter pulling up over to my left, and just watching the Hellfires rip off into the distance. And it was definitely an overwhelming amount of force that we brought against the Iraqis. I think there's also a misconception that the Iraqis never fought back and they all surrendered.
Mm-hmm.
And that certainly was not the case. We exchanged fire with them many times. We just overwhelmed them to the point that we broke their will to continue to fight.
Right. Well, and a lot of it was technology, but I think, after my time in service, a lot of it too is just the American soldier. Like, I don't know how to describe that. Like, even if they had crappy technology, they'd find a way to make it work.
Yeah, I think we have aggressive tactics. If you look at, we were part of that big Hail Mary right hook into Iraq. Schwarzkopf was like, we're just going to crush him. And I mean, that's I know in the Army, our doctrine is you run towards enemy fire, not away from it. So you hear gunshots, you turn and you face the gunshots and you start moving towards it.
Right.
And that's, effective because you meet violence with a greater violence. And, that seems to work for the U.S. military. To your point, even when we're at overwhelming odds, the American soldier seems to find a way.
Yeah. Close with and destroy the enemy. Right. I mean, that's what you got to do. Yeah. And so there was another question I was going to ask you as we're going through this, and I must be getting old because I forgot my question. That doesn't happen very often. But yeah, so you're I think the other thing too, that's what I was gonna get at, is that we do have this doctrine, and we do have these TTPs and all these other things published in books, and here's how you do this and here's how you do that. But I think the one thing that we don't do is we don't always follow this. Like, we have a plan, right? But we don't always follow like that thing that was printed in the book. That's kind of the foundation, but that crap never works because that's not how it works in the field.
No, we definitely train, and I think that is the big thing, is you train so you know how you're going to react. But combat is complete chaos. I remember when we were after the first shots were fired, we were getting a little closer. All of a sudden, somebody opened up a machine gun, and I'm like, who in the hell is shooting? I had no idea where it was coming from. So it turns out it was in the lane next to us. But and And there was another point I'm kind of like a prairie dog. I had my head sticking up, kind of looking around, and some Iraqis sent a volley of rounds overhead. They were probably 15, 20 feet ahead over my head, but you could hear them zipping by. And, you quickly realize, hey, that's probably not a smart idea to be sitting up here like a prairie dog. So to your point, you're not really prepared for any of that. I was 20 years old. We prepared for a lot of things, but you just don't know until you're in the middle of it. And especially with Desert Storm, we were moving so fast. And at one point, we'll fast forward a couple of days, we got separated from our unit, and we ended up being transferred to another unit just because as we were hitting enemy positions, they were moving on and attacking the Iraqis at the Battle of Norfolk, another big tank battle that took place. So we ended up separated from our unit, and we ended up with 216 Task Force. But on that first day, to get back to the chaos of everything, we closed in on the first Iraqi tanks. I remember I'm driving, and I look to my left, and there's this burning T-52 tank. And there were bodies and body parts hanging around it. And I remember just looking over to my left, and all of a sudden I just hear this big thump. And I remember dirt falling on me, and then everything just went black. We had ran over a landmine, and I don't think I was out long. Minute, two, I can't say for certain. But I mean, I kind of started to come to, and I'm yelling into my boom mic, is everyone okay? And it was just dead silence. And for a minute, I was like panicked,
right?
Because I was certain they were dead. I'm also reaching down to see if my legs are
I was going to say, you're doing the whole, everything's here, no blood.
Patting everything down because you're, it's like Mike Tyson just punched you in the face. So you're dazed. You don't really know what's happening. So once Sergeant Basher, he hits his boom mic, and he's like, yeah, I think we're okay. So I roll out of the track, and I'm looking to see if we'd been hit, because I thought we were hit by a tank round at that time.
Yeah.
So I'm looking to see what the damage is. And as I walk towards the back, I see my trailer, and the axles are blown out from under it. And some of our equipment scattered around the desert. It was 6 inches narrower than my track. So my track missed the landmine, but my trailer hit it. And you could see in the armor where shrapnel had embedded into the armor, did a splash into it. It was, and again, I'm just looking at this like, holy crap, we just ran over a landmine.
Right.
So I'm crawling up on top of my track, because at that point I don't want to walk anywhere, realizing I'm in a landmine, a minefield. I think it was just an anti-personnel mine, but still didn't want to step on one.
Yeah.
And I got back in my vehicle, and I shoved it into drive. My captain's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "We can't sit here, sir. We're taking fire." So, we just dragged that trailer across the desert for a couple of miles with cutting a big furrow behind us. Eventually they brought a Hemet up to take it and put it on that. But, I don't remember how long we dragged that. Things get a little fuzzy, so I try not to fill in the holes, because I think just the speed we were moving, and turns out, mild traumatic brain injury isn't real good for memory. So
no, that's true. The other thing too is you're talking about, you're moving so quickly. All of these things are happening. Like, this isn't slow motion or like a movie. I mean, this is just happening, right? So much so that you get separated from your unit, you get tasked to another unit, you're just moving forward because you can't not move forward.
Right.
Did you find that, like, there was no time to react, there was no time to think about it until it was done?
Yeah. So especially those first couple of days, we went 30 hours of straight combat. No sleep. We were just rolling, moving. We had, I'd ran over a landmine. we had hit light infantry positions, and we were literally clearing trenches with a squad at a time. We usually had a Bradley supporting us for heavy bunkers and stuff, but it all just becomes a blur, to your point. And it was just one battle after the other, another group of prisoners that we were taking. It all starts to blend together to some extent. And then on, I believe, the fourth day of the ground war, they called the ceasefire. Not all of us were happy about that choice, but nonetheless, to your point, it starts to give you time to think about things. As we were heading down into Kuwait, because part of that agreement was we would move out of Iraq, except for a 5-mile DMZ that we established. We were driving through the night, and one of our units found this kid's body, so we ended up sitting there with him for a couple hours until Graves Registration came and picked him up. And that's when we knew we had taken some losses, but that was like really real at that moment when you're sitting there looking at a kid that's about the same age as you and, just dead in the desert all alone.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. But for the grace of God, that could be you, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now you didn't, so it doesn't sound like you didn't take any casualties though in your direct.
Not in our company.
Yeah.
So with the 1st Infantry Division, I believe they had a total of 21 combatant deaths in those 4 days. We would later learn that our headquarters for 9th Engineers, we had 2 guys taken prisoner of war. They were actually lost for 5 days before somebody realized they were gone. We actually found out from the Iraqis that they had been taken prisoner. So, again, logistics in those days were really bad.
Yeah.
The battlefield was moving so quickly. We ended up being scattered in with other units. We had other units. I could go on and on about the stories, but we had another unit that was trailing us that got killed by our own people because they were where they shouldn't have been. So it was chaos. To your point, as we talked before, we didn't have Blue Force Tracker in those days. We didn't know who was who. All we could tell is there's a heat signature on the horizon. So if you weren't where you were supposed to be, you could easily end up in a friendly fire incident.
Let's take a quick break.
Hey, listeners, we need your help to keep the Veterans Archives podcast going. We're a nonprofit dedicated to preserving the stories of our nation's heroes, and we provide this service completely free to veterans. Your support helps us record, share, and archive these incredible stories so future generations never forget the sacrifices made for our freedom. Every donation, big or small, makes a difference. Visit veteransarchives.org to contribute today. Help us honor their service by ensuring their voices are heard. And thank you for your support, and thank you to all the veterans who have served our country. Well, and if you think about it, I think this is like the first asymmetric, this is like the beginning of asymmetric warfare, right? There's no front line anymore. It's kind of everywhere. And I think we saw a little of that during D-Day, but I mean, eventually you had front lines, you had established, but that just didn't happen in the desert.
No, we overwhelmed them even more than I think we thought was going to happen. Our tanks just never stopped. I mean, they just kept moving and kept attacking. At one point, we were taking prisoners, but we were handing them off to cooks and mechanics because the battlefield was just moving so quickly, and we were moving forward to hit the next light infantry section. Mm-hmm. So the speed and everything was just overwhelming. At one point, the 1st Infantry Division was chasing down retreating Iraqi tanks and chewing them up, and that was about the time when they called the ceasefire. Yeah.
I mean, the enemy's definitely got the message.
Yeah.
So you moved down. So did you guys head down to like Kuwait City then?
So we went, there's a border crossing called Safwan, and that's the Iraqi side. I don't remember the city that's on the Kuwaiti side, but that's where we moved into Safwan Airfield and the border area. After we left that kid with somebody from Graves Registration, we headed down to Safwan. We set up a hasty perimeter around the airfield, and then we drove into the little Kuwaiti city. And I remember as we're driving in there wasn't a building that wasn't just riddled with bullet holes. And you started to see the devastation that the Iraqis had left on the Kuwaiti people. So to your point, I think when we were fighting the Iraqis, you didn't really have time to think about the horrors of war, I guess. You're just in, but then when we started going through Kuwait and you saw the women coming out with the children and just the horror and hollow eyes, it started to make you really angry. And the lack of men that were around, the Iraqis had killed so many of them that it was just commonplace.
Mm-hmm.
And people were starving, hungry. We were throwing MREs out of our vehicles to locals, and they'd literally fight over an MRE. I wouldn't fight for an MRE.
No,
ever.
No. I'd fight you if you made me eat one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it was a weird dichotomy for me, because I was angry as hell at the Iraqis, but at the same time, none of it sat well with me. There's no good way to kill another human being, and we were tasked to move into the highway of death, if you remember that. We chewed up the Iraqis as they were retreating out of Kuwait, cut them off, and there were just vehicles and bodies all over the road. So because we had a heavy equipment platoon, they took a bulldozer and kind of opened up the roadway. And then we were taking care of any explosives left behind. We had sea tractors. They were actually tasked with picking up bodies and body parts.
Mm-hmm.
Our bulldozers made shallow graves for Graves Registration, and we spent the better part of a day putting bodies in pits, which I remember, again, I'm 20 years old, sitting there eating my lunch, trying to be a tough guy, because, you don't want to show any weakness to anybody. But
Right.
That really didn't sit well with me for a lot of years afterwards, but it was just apocalyptic. It was hell on earth. And there were just bodies everywhere. At one point, I walked away from the pit and I cut across the highway, walked through some trucks that were burned out, and again, there's body parts everywhere, burned Iraqis. And I walked through these two vehicles, and I feel like I was almost at a breaking point. I just had to get away from everything. So I round this truck, and a dog barks at me. And I'm like Barney Fife trying to get my 45 out because he scared the hell out of me. So
Yeah.
I finally get my 45 out, and I start to pull up, and the dog barks again. He runs off but then I realized he'd been chewing on a human leg, or a piece of what was a human leg. And I'm like, I remember just thinking, where is God in all this? It was too much. And so I look off into the desert, and maybe 200 meters away, there's just this white Mercedes-Benz with the trunk open. So, I'm still like, I'm wanting to get away from everything. So I walk towards that Mercedes, and the trunk's wide open. You can see some luggage in there that's been rifled through, probably from the Iraqis during the initial invasion back in August of 90.
Mm-hmm.
And it's surreal sometimes, the things that happen. And there was this wedding dress in the back of this Mercedes, and I don't know how to explain. It was like just too much.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing my dad's voice because he would always be like, just pray about it. And I forgive my language, but I remember saying, I don't feel like fucking praying right now.
Yeah.
And I was literally just like, all the days prior to that came like all down at once. And you could see some bones near the driver's door where somebody had been killed, probably the male driver, bullet holes in the side of it. And about 100 meters away, these damn dogs are eating a dead Iraqi. And I lost it at that moment. I also carried an M16 and a 45.
Right.
So I pulled my M16 up and I popped the first dog. I remember, like, for a minute he picked his head up and I could just see the blood on his muzzle, and I just lost it. So I dropped him. The dog started to scatter. I shot another one. I hit him in the ass and he spun around in circles. And then I popped off one more round. I remember hearing Sergeant Basher yelling as I'm shooting, Scott, what are you doing? And I popped off a couple more rounds. And by then there's just like tears streaming down my face. And I quit shooting, but he's like making a beeline right towards me, yelling at me. And I put my hand up and he just stopped. He knew it was like, and I'm just like, give me a minute. And there were no words exchanged, but he just stood there staring at me. And I'm like, so I just started walking off in the desert again. You don't want to show any weakness. I don't want to see anybody to see me crying. You know what I mean? So yeah. I took a few minutes and just like walked off into the desert and had to compose myself. But it just got to be, all the death, the killing, it was just more than anyone should have to endure, and way too much for a 20-year-old kid.
Well, I can't, it's hard to wrap my head around, like, no matter where you turned at that point, it's just death.
Yeah. Part of, again, that war for us was we were as efficient as you could be. And obviously that isn't a good thing when you're talking about human life and the toll it takes. So part of that, as good as the war was in our favor, it was hard to realize you were part of just, I think the estimates are 80 to 100,000 Iraqis we killed in those few days. My unit alone, we took 2,000 Iraqi prisoners, but we destroyed an entire Iraqi division. So that leaves 6,000 to 8,000 guys that we buried. So it was as good as it was, we didn't take a lot of losses. The other part of that is, I said it before, there's no good way to kill another person, and it sits with you.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, I think the narrative back home is just as you said, they all surrendered and they ran away, but we don't talk about the overwhelming loss of life on the side of the enemy. And at the end of the day, you do what you have to do. It's the lesser of two evils, right?
Yeah. And I've written a lot of those short stories, traumatic things that I went through, but to your point, it was just death everywhere. And it seemed like you always found the damn boots.
Yeah.
I don't know if you experienced that when you were in Iraq, but for some reason the boots always stay intact. The rest of the body can be scattered all over the place, but I remember that distinctly. Just along the highway of death, around the tanks, you'd always see those damn boots laying there, and 9 times out of 10 there was still somebody's foot in it. So
yeah. Well-made boots.
Yeah.
Gonna buy stock in that company.
For whatever reason, the leather seems to hold it together.
Yeah, no doubt. So how long were you actually there then?
So we stayed till May.
Mm-hmm.
So we stayed in Kuwait for a while, and we were mostly blowing up Iraqi stuff that was left behind. We were doing missions into Iraq. We had that 5-mile demilitarized zone. Not all of the Iraqi units had gotten the information, so we actually had to force a few of them out of there. We never exchanged fire, but there were some tense moments. But when we'd show up with a TOW-2 missile launcher and an Apache, they usually got the idea that we meant business.
Yeah, maybe we should go, guys. Maybe we should get out of here.
Because we showed up at one compound, and I remember the guy was yelling at my captain, this is Iraq, we're not leaving. And one guy ran into this building. Well, I pulled my 45 up and I pointed it right at the guy. Of course, then he settled down a little bit, but there was a tense standoff for about an hour. But once the Apaches finally arrived, there was no more argument. They were leaving.
Right. Because all Dad has to do is threaten to spank you, and he means it.
Absolutely. But yeah, there were a few moments like that, even post-war, that we were still engaging with the Iraqis. They wanted to take their weapons with them, and we're like, yeah, no, those are all staying. And we blew up so many tanks and munition depots, buried a few chemical weapons that we found, and then I remember one time we found these surface-to-air missiles. They must have been 10 feet long, so we wired them up with C4, and we were just going to blow the whole lot. We cooked them off, and as we're sitting there, one of these missiles just comes streaking across the desert, probably a few hundred meters to to the side of where we were at, and we're like, holy shit, and then as it's sitting there burning, another one cooks off and goes shooting up in the sky, and we're like, oh man, we need to get out of here. So things don't always work out the way you think they're going to. To your point you made earlier, you have doctrine about how to wire things up, but we'd blow up caches of weapons, especially artillery rounds, and not everything would cook off, and then you'd have secondary explosions and hot artillery rounds that come flying out of the bunkers. So, we quickly learned if we were going to load anything up, we went about 2 to 3 times the amount of demo we thought we needed.
Yeah, good rule of thumb, huh?
Yep, just double it.
So, I'm curious, like, you're getting rid of munitions, you're blowing up old tanks, that kind of stuff. Did you find that to be like a nice buffer from what you had experienced in that 4 days to now you're just kind of getting rid of equipment? And there's some, I don't know, when we blew up weapons caches, there was something fun, like it relieved the tension almost. Did you find that?
Yeah. Oh, I think, engineers are a little nutty to begin with, because anyone that's going to stand in a bunker full of demolitions, and, at any point you could just be a pink mist if something goes wrong.
Right.
So, but there were times, when the bigger the boom, I mean, it's just exciting. We blew one bunker, and the lid must have went 1/8 of a mile into the sky, and you could just see the shockwave coming across the desert.
Uh-huh.
You could see it pushing the moon dust in front of it, and boom, I mean, you just feel it in your chest, and you're like, oh yeah.
Like a little kid, right?
Yeah,
like
just
when you're lighting off firecrackers as a kid, right? Did you see that thing fly?
And then there were, most of the time it was fine. There were other times, a couple of times we had to defuse mines. That was terrifying.
Oh, but
which an anti-tank mine is pretty stable, but there's something about unscrewing the top and pulling the fuse out of it that just everything in you doesn't want to do that.
Very counterintuitive to go up and do that. But I mean, that comes back to what we talked about really early on, and that is that you run to the sound of the gun. You don't run away from it. And you have to make yourself do things that your body is saying, this really isn't a good idea. And your brain, every part of your body is like, this is not a good idea, but you have to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And, it's what you're trained to do. It's, and in those instances, most of the time we just blow things in place if we could.
Right.
But the one I'm talking about where we had to defuse these mines is because they were right out front of this guy's house. And when we showed up there, it's just a rock hut, with blankets in the windows. Mm-hmm. And he had these kids running around. And I remember he waved us down. We didn't speak any Arabic, and he goes over and he picks up a damn pot, and there's a landmine under it. We're like, oh, whoa, what the hell? And it's right out front of his house. We went in his house, and the Iraqis had stored some munitions in there. We were able to move that stuff out, but The landmines, we didn't want to take the chance of moving because it was so close to the house. So we ended up diffusing those before we removed them. But anything that was a little further out, we just blew in place.
Yeah, the safest way to do it.
Yep.
So this continued on for how long then before you left Kuwait?
So we were in Kuwait February, March, April. We must have been at least 2.5 months in Kuwait. Engineers were the busiest in Kuwait because there's so much demolitions that were left behind, unexploded ordnance. I mean, there were cluster bombs all over the place in the soft sand. So, we were busy day in and day out, either blowing up caches of weapon, getting rid of any things that were left in Kuwait or any unexploded ordnance that was discovered. So we were never at a lack of things to do. And we were also at Safwan there. We were part of the show of force when they did the surrender. Schwarzkopf came in. So, we always had something to do.
Okay. All right. So tell me a little about what it was like to leave and come back. Did you go home afterwards?
I went back to Germany initially. So we went down to King Fahd Airport and we were there just a week or so. That was kind of surreal too, because a USO band came in and, we'd been living in the desert for months at that point. And, all men at that point. Combat arms was strictly men back in those days. So, we had seen a woman or a chow hall in three months. So I know when we showed up at this air base, we must have looked like animals. We're dirty. We have loaded weapons, grenades hanging off of us. And we walk into this chow hall and I just remember these Air Force guys looking at us like, what the hell just walked through the front door? I think that's kind of like an analogy for later on. You don't come home the same, and it takes a while to get back to normal. But getting back to Germany was nice. It felt kind of normal, but I think you don't even realize it at first, but you start to get little glimpses of like, maybe I'm not quite as normal as I was before I left. But I was only in Germany for a couple of months and then I ETS'd out of the Army.
Okay. And you said something about not being the same. And I've often heard people say like the people that go to war aren't the people that come home. Right.
Yeah.
And you just can't, that's just not how it works. And so you ETS'd out of the Army fairly soon after getting back from combat. And walk me through that.
That was probably the worst thing that could have happened to me. Because, I talk about how I was down in a trench with a hand grenade and a 45, and 4 months later, I'm back in Michigan. And nobody was talking about PTSD or anything back in those days. And it was just, you go back to normal life, but there's nothing normal about anything you just went through. I remember like the first time I heard fireworks, I was practically under the counter,
Yeah.
And I just remember, I don't think anyone knew how to help me or with what I was going through. I certainly wasn't at a point where I was 21 at that time. I didn't know how to deal with any of the stuff I'd gone.
You're 21. You're in that unique situation where you left combat and then ETS pretty quickly. You come back home, like battlefield to home, and I'm assuming you went back to West Branch then when you got back.
I did. I spent a little bit of time in the Detroit area, but eventually went back to West Branch after a couple of months. Started working in a factory. Hated everything about it, So I joke around all the time that in the Army I had this heightened sense of purpose. I was part of something bigger than myself. I came home. I don't think I could articulate it at that time, but I'm pressing out parts in a factory, and I'm thinking, is this really my life now? There has to be more than just this. So at first, the first couple of years were probably the worst. I don't know how I didn't end up in jail or dead, to be honest, because I was just living a little crazy. But I would say the first 5 years when I came home, it took me a while to get back to normal. The second factory I worked in, I met a Vietnam veteran, and he could just like listen and not say much and nod his head, and we could talk about things like, yep, you didn't have to articulate it, but you knew the other guy had seen some shit. So
Right.
That started to make me feel a little normal again, helped a little bit. But when I was 26, my daughter was born. I think that was the moment I realized I need to fix myself. I can't keep living like I am. So probably the best thing that ever happened to me was having a daughter, because I think I would have been way too hard on a boy. It softened me up a little bit, and it kind of forced me to figure out how do I fix myself, because I knew I wasn't okay.
Mm-hmm. Time to get your shit in one sock, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah. So you, so were you married at this time?
I was.
Okay.
I got married a couple of years after I came back, so 93, and then in 96 we had our daughter.
Okay. How'd you meet your wife?
So I actually met her when I was home on leave. Well, that's when we started dating.
Mm-hmm.
I had known her for years. I knew her family. Again, Ogemaw County, West Branch, small town. So she was a freshman in high school when I was a senior, but we started dating when I was home on leave before Desert Storm.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So local gal, get married, have a daughter. Now, was your wife working at the time too?
Yeah. So it's funny because we look back at all the chapters of our lives. I was working in a factory, and she was the head cashier at Kmart. So, our lives have come a long way since then, but, to your point, I think she would definitely tell you I was not the same guy she met a year prior to that.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely came home different. I think it definitely caused some issues for us early on in our marriage. But again, having a daughter, I think, is the best thing that happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it definitely, helped straighten me out. It wasn't just overnight, obviously. Long journey to find your way back to whatever normal looks like.
Right.
But one of the things I didn't mention, oddly enough, we had another guy from Ogemaw County get transferred into our unit right before we left for Desert Storm. So 3 guys from Ogemaw County in the same company. I don't know if it's divine intervention or just random, but the odds are astronomically slim that could happen. He came back to Ogemaw County about 5 years later,
Mm-hmm.
and the 2 of us could talk about things that I couldn't talk about with anybody else. And it wasn't just, and it was different than even talking with the Vietnam veteran, because we literally chewed the same dirt. We experienced the same things. I mean, we would both sit and talk about, one of the short stories I wrote is, he didn't make it. One of the guys that we popped in, I mean, he's sitting there, just staring at us, and then he ended up eventually dying. But we both were there for that event, so it was, you had a shared experience that is just different than anything anybody else could even talk about with. So
yeah, there's power in that, in talking with other veterans. In fact, that's why we're doing what we do, right? Is other veterans will hear this and be, oh, well, maybe I'm not as unique as I thought I was. Because I think we all kind of think, to some extent, nobody else could possibly be going through this.
Yeah, no, and I worked in veterans mental health for a while, and I think that's one of the things is traumas all look different, but at the end of it, there's not, the war may be different, the setting may be different, but the way we internalize it and, carry that with us, looks the same.
Mhm.
And I think, you come back to the U.S. and you go to work in a factory and maybe one or two other veterans, and you feel very alone, and everything about war is not what we're taught to. We're taught to respect life. We're taught to treat people with kindness, and then you become a animal, you become a savage, and it's like your identity isn't what it used to be.
Right. Well, then you have to reconcile that at some point.
Yeah.
I mean, some people just never do, but I think you have to. So clearly you no longer stamp parts at a factory, and Kmart doesn't exist. So your wife's not a cashier there anymore. Walk me through. So after your daughter's born, kind of walk me through what happens.
So I eventually started a hardwood flooring company. And I did that successfully for about 12 years. My wife had went back to school when my daughter was young, probably 5 or 6 years old, to become an attorney. So after 2009, she passed the bar exam and got a job down here in Lansing. So I started shutting down my wood flooring business and sold the house up north. We were kind of in transition for about a year or so. But at that same time, I decided to go back in the Army a second time and join the Army Reserve while going back to school to get my degree.
Uh-huh. All right. So let's talk about that decision. First of all, how'd your wife take that?
So I don't think she was thrilled about it, but one of the things she said is that, when she came home and told me she wanted to be an attorney, I said, let's get you signed up for classes. And she said, I was always her biggest cheerleader and supporter. So, when I decided I wanted to go back in the Army, she felt she had no choice but to support me in my decision. And I think for me, there's always a part of me that'll be a soldier. And, the early 2000s, I felt like I was sitting on the sidelines watching Iraq and Afghanistan. And I wanted to work with veterans. As I said, I worked in mental health for a little while. And I thought some more modern, relevant experience would help me connect with some of those veterans and in helping them through some of the issues. Part of that was I was talking to a couple of Iraq veterans, and it's like I saw myself, 20 years later. So I just felt like I had something to offer. Mm-hmm. I could see what they'd gone through, and I just felt like I had to do something.
Yeah. So you joined the Army Reserve. Are you in engineering again, or?
No, I went back in as psychological operations. So our unit was in Grand Rapids, 321st PSYOP Company. Okay.
And how was that? Because you'd been out of uniform for a couple of years.
Yeah, there was. I had a 19-year break in service before I went back in. So I went back in at the age of 40. At that time they were desperate for people. So 40 was still acceptable to come back in if you're a prior service. But as you know, at 40, you're the old man in the Army.
Oh yeah. And guess what? You don't bounce anymore. By the way, you crack and splat and everything else.
Yeah. So it was definitely odd coming back in. I made sergeant pretty quickly, but because of my all my old history in the military, but coming back in as an enlisted person, E4, and then becoming a sergeant at 40 years old, you're definitely the old man in that category.
So there's two camps on this, right? There's the one camp that's like, God dang, that guy's old, and then there's the other camp that's going, boy, he really must have screwed up if he's 40 years old and he's just now making sergeant. I wonder what he did.
Yeah, so that it was funny, but I've always led by example, so even at 40, I would challenge myself to make sure I passed the 18 to 21 physical fitness standards. So I never allowed somebody to make the excuse, well, I can pass your you're physical fitness old man.
Right.
I'm like, no, I pass yours. So keep up.
Yeah. Yeah. Bring it on, buddy.
Yeah. So, leading by example, and I think with a little bit of age, I was a little more relaxed in my leadership style than a lot of the military is. So I think my genuine concern for other soldiers showed through. I could still be a hard sergeant at times, but, I think it didn't take me long to really build rapport with the guys, even though they're 20 years younger than I was.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So you crossed over a different rate. So you had to go to school for that, correct?
Yeah. So we did travel training. The 100th Training Brigade met us in Fort Dix, and we did the PSYOP selection course there.
Okay. Lovely Fort Dix, New Jersey.
Oh, I hate that place.
Yeah.
I spent way too many hours there.
I that's where we did our train up for deployment.
Yeah,
It was out of Fort
us
Dix.
as well.
Oh my God.
The second one, which we'll get to here in a minute.
Freaking horror story. So yeah, so you're chugging along. Now, are you in school too as well?
I was going to Michigan State to get my undergraduate in psychology.
Okay.
At the same time, I was working in a veterans treatment court, so deeply involved in the community and veterans affairs. Just because, again, I kind of had a passion for it. Finished my degree in 2014, and immediately found out I was going to be deployed to Africa.
Nice. So before we get there, I want to ask though, this is kind of a side note. When you went to MSU, did you take the veterans certificate course that they offer?
I did not.
Okay.
I did not.
Their social work department offers this really great certificate course. So I didn't know if you were familiar with that.
I am familiar with that, but I think that came about shortly after I had finished my master's in human resources.
Okay. That makes sense. All right. So you say it's 2015.
Yes.
You got your degree. And then they're like, oh, guess what? You're going to Africa.
Yeah. So 2014, I got my degree. That was in August because I had been taking summer classes, and we got tasked to send a psychological operations detachment to support Joint Task Force in Horn of Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So I was selected for that, and I ran our product development detachment portion of that as the NCOIC. But we get tasked to go. We're putting together this ragtag group of people. I often say the PSYOP group is the misfits of the Army. They're intelligent enough to be dangerous, but too smart to be infantry, but not refined enough to be an officer.
What do they say? I need a guy that's smart enough to do the job and dumb enough to take it.
Yes, I feel like psychological operations is exactly that. It's definitely a eclectic group of people that end up in that. But we want people who think outside the box. But that doesn't always work with the typical Army hierarchy where you do what you're told.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was in the National Guard. So there's always it seems like there's always a little bit of friction. You got to almost prove yourself. And then once you do, everything's fine. But regular Army looks at you a little bit differently. Oh,
absolutely. And, I did as well. When I came out of active duty, I would look down my nose at the Guard and Reserve guys. And, but I think when you're prior active and you go into the Reserve Guard, you bring some of that with you. But yeah, it's definitely a different. And then when you're attached to a regular unit, to your point, I feel like you have to prove your worth because they're still just looking at you like you're a reserve guy who's just here for a deployment.
But your advantage, I think, is that you have, to your point, an eclectic group of people with all of this civilian experience that they bring into the military, which I think is really helpful when you're trying to get stuff done.
Yeah, I agree. Our deployment to Africa, we were able to get a lot of stuff done while we were there. It was, I called a combat light deployment because we weren't actively engaged. We were doing kind of some proxy war stuff with African nations, but that group of guys and a couple of women that deployed over to Africa, we were able to put out more series of psychological operations product in that year than they had seen for a decade prior to that. So to your point, people came in with all kinds of different skills, and you want those people that think outside the box because they find a way to get things done that sometimes the bureaucracy, the Army, you have to get creative to find a way around that.
Oh yeah. Yes, you do. And that's the advantage of that civilian background, because you know how to get around things.
Absolutely.
And the Army guys don't.
Right.
They're more worried about their evaluations.
Yep.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So walk me through this deployment, because it sounds kind of cool. PsyOps, Africa.
It was interesting. It was difficult for me because we were big on force protection there, and I think that's just I think things changed because Iraq and Afghanistan, we'd gone to this FOB mindset, and that was hard for me to wrap my head around because as a former engineer, my job is outside the wire, not in the wire. And same with psychological operations. I can't be effective sitting behind a wall. So I did struggle with that a little bit. You need to unleash me a little bit so I can do my job. So we eventually found a way to get that done, but the whole deployment was just different for me. There's a lot of similarities, but every war, every deployment is different and unique in its own way. But Camp Lemonnier, Djibouti is a miserable place. I thought Iraq was hot, but Djibouti is it's horrible. But it was a great deployment. We accomplished some really cool things while we were there. We were working down in Kenya for a while, working with Somali dissidents because we would develop products and run it by Somalis who had left Somalia recently. Mm-hmm. Before we would put our radio or print products. We made a comic book while we were there that we gave to school children because they had just recently established a federal government, and Somalia had been 29 years without a government. So people didn't even have an idea of what a federal government was. So we were trying to, at the youth level, at every age group, we had different products that we were trying to instill this idea of we are Somali. We're one nation, not just the tribe Somali, but the nation of Somalia.
And so when you talk about products, for anyone listening that's not military, you're talking about like literal products like leaflets and booklets and things like that. And then also radio shows, I guess, that kind of thing. I remember PsyOps in Iraq, they were handing out soccer balls and things like that as well.
Yeah, it really depends on the priorities of the deployment. So for us, we were, again, trying to support the Somali police, support the idea of a Somali government, and degrade Al-Shabaab, who is the bad actor in that area. So all of our products were revolving around that. We had radio stations where they would talk about issues in Somalia. A couple of our radio announcers actually were shot and killed for speaking out against Al-Shabaab. So there was a real threat there, but it was just different for me because having gone through Desert Storm, I was probably a little too lax. I'm like, this is nothing. Right. But it wasn't nothing. I mean, there was a real threat, real danger there. But it's all depends on what you already know, so, but we did get quite a bit done while we were there working with, the Somali government. Everything had to go through them, for approval. So we had to work with our legal team at Camp Lemonnier. I have a copy of this comic book at home that went out to Somali kids.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of like a Archie type comic book. It would present you with a moral issue, which it's funny. I showed this to other people, and they're like, well, we've never had to worry about finding a crate of hand grenades, so the moral issues were a little different in some of these stories, but and then they would use they would call the local police for resolution, because that was new to them.
Mm-hmm.
Before, it was just tribal and warlords, and you solve things by contacting the guy with the AK-47. So
Right.
it was definitely a unique set of things we were working on. We also helped set up a schoolhouse in Uganda for psychological operations. The Ugandans were interested in having their own psychological operations group, so we established a schoolhouse in Jinja at their war college, went down there and trained them on our tactics, and then they went forward into Somalia for a couple of months. We met them there again and trained them again. So got to go to Uganda a couple of times and train in their war college, which was really unique. You don't think that you'll be teaching classes on the deployment, but that was part of what I ended up doing while I was there as well.
So I want to, that kind of brings up a point that I think sometimes when people talk about going to places that are tribal, whether it's, Iraq or Africa, when they think tribal, I think there's this tendency to really think that you're dealing with some people who aren't very intelligent. Like you have to respect the people that you're with, but when you talk about teaching them psyops in their war college, I don't think people think about it in those terms when they think about Uganda or some other areas. But they are. These are well-developed societies and areas, and whether they're tribal or not, they're very intelligent people who you can't discount.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think, from our American lens and what we see on the television, we have a hard time understanding other cultures. And some of the kindest people I've ever met were, in Somalia. Not everyone there is looking to kill you. Some of them are just fantastic people who are just trying to get by. I think one thing I learned on that deployment is there's certainly bad actors out there, but I think there's more good in most people than there is bad.
Mm-hmm.
I think most people just want to live their life, and live in relative peace. But there's certain parts of the world where that isn't. They don't have the rule of law that we have here in America.
Right. I think we came up with a phrase called Iraqi good enough, right? Like they're never going to meet the American yardstick of success, but they're going to meet the Iraqi yardstick of success, which is just as important.
Yeah. And I think that's part of it is, you have to stabilize the nation first. And that was a big thing that we were trying to do in Somalia, is just get some sense of normalcy, some sense of national pride, and then you build from there. We take it for granted that most people behave the way they're supposed to here in the United States, but we have police forces, we have rule of law that's established. There's parts of the world where that's just not the norm.
Right. And you kind of have to accept what their normal is and work from that point forward.
Absolutely.
So how long were you in Africa then?
So that was a year deployment, 10 months in country. But we arrived there in January. I believe we left the first part of November. So it might have been it might have been closer to 11 months, but that we were in country.
Okay. And how was that for your wife and your daughter?
I think it was difficult for them. My daughter was in college at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I think my wife, it was probably more difficult for one, our daughter was gone, and then all of a sudden I'm gone, and she's kind of on her own for that year. The difference is, I think, was that, I could use Skype, which was new to me. My first deployment, we lived in a GP medium in the desert. And now I lived in a Connex that was air conditioned, and I had internet, and I could Skype my family. So it's not the same as being home, but it certainly wasn't 3 weeks to get a letter like it was during Desert Storm. So 24 years between my two combat deployments, and it was just funny to me how some of it was the same, but some of it was so incredibly different.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I can only imagine. So you finish your deployment and then you come home. Now, typically, coming back from deployment on active duty is a lot different than coming back from deployment in the reserves. But this is almost the same for you, right? Because you came back from deployment in ETS and now you're coming back. What was it like to come back from Africa?
So I think, we had the yellow ribbon ceremony when we come back, and that was new to me. We didn't have anything like that the first time. And I remember people sitting around talking about deployment, and I remember almost scoffing at it a little bit, like, this was easy, man. This was nothing, and it wasn't until later that I realized it wasn't nothing. And again, you only compare it to what you know, and compared to Desert Storm, it felt like nothing at the time. But we lost a kid while we were there, Swaggart. That struck everybody hard. I didn't really think about it until about a year later. All of a sudden I was thinking about Swaggart, and you realize that it impacted you a lot more than you realize. And you're a year away from family, because you have the pre-deployment, post-deployment. We were definitely well over a year total. But I think I started to realize, even a easy deployment isn't easy. So I think that's the one thing I had to remind myself as I was working with veterans. We're very good at trying to out trauma one another. Oh, you didn't see any real action, yeah. But the fact of the matter is, there's days even in Africa that were very tense. We got in the middle of a political situation where they were shooting rubber bullets into the crowd. That's traumatic. To me, it didn't seem like much, but again, it's not a small situation when you're 3 white guys in a crowd of Africans and bullets are flying.
It's no small thing.
No, it's not a small thing. So, I think it took me a while to realize, as I joke and I call it a combat light deployment, but it had a bigger impact on me than I realized. And I think I had to take a little time to think it through and realize it was bigger than I thought.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like too, it's perspective that, I remember coming back from deployment and going right back to work, and the problems that people had at work just seemed so tiny. Like, are you kidding me? That's a problem. And then having to go back and realize that, yes, people's problems are their problems, and you can't do that comparison, right? The combat shaming.
Yeah. No. And I think we're veterans. Sometimes we're our own worst enemy because, again, we look at everybody's medals and where they've been and, what's your resume compared to mine. And, really we should be supporting each other. If you signed up and served, then, you might not have had the same opportunities I did or other people did, but, we all at some point decided we were going to raise our hand and be part of something bigger.
Right. Well, in even non-combat roles support what we do in combat roles. So it's all, I don't think anything's more important than the other, right? Because without one, you don't get the other. So your time in the reserves, you were working then?
I was working part-time. I was working in the Veterans Treatment Court in East Lansing and going to school. And then because I was psychological operations, I actually spent anywhere from 90 to 120 days per year in uniform. So it was a little more than your average reserve or National Guard commitment. I did a lot of schools, Army Basic Instructor School, Army Warfare School, just to name a couple. And then we just had more training opportunities because we were a special operations group.
Right. Probably training was just not open to just anybody, right?
Right.
And how long did you serve in the reserves then?
So I did a 6-year stint on that one from 2010 to 2016. I got out in September of 2016. I have a picture, I'm wearing my uniform on September 11th, 2016. Last time I wore my my dress blues, and I still love that picture and take a look at it every now and then. One of the things, we'll talk a little bit more, but there's 5-6 combat veterans in that photo, and 2 of them have taken their lives since that photo was taken. And it's just, I think when we talk about combat deployments or even just being in the military, people experience things that are just difficult to digest. And I think you said it before, not everyone gets back to normal.
Yeah. Well, for me and for a lot of people that I talk to, I think this goes back to what we were talking about way earlier, is that when you're in it, you're just pushing through, you're getting it done, you're not thinking about it. It's when you come home and it's late at night and you have time to process it. And that's, to me, that was the hardest part. I mean, I deployed with 217 soldiers, and I didn't lose one of them until I got home.
Yeah.
And I think it is, and it's not always the combat like you saw in Iraq or in Kuwait and those other areas. Sometimes it's that deployment to Africa that really impact people as well. I mean, everyone processes things differently, but yeah, and it's years later. It's not like right when you get back, it can hit you at any time.
No, one of the guys in that photo that I referred to, he was in Kosovo. So, most people don't think of Kosovo as a combat deployment, but he was there early on the ground, and he saw the atrocities that happened there. So he wasn't directly involved in combat, but I mean that stuck with him, and he never seemed to get over it. And obviously he ended up end of his life just 2 years ago. So
yeah, and that's hard too for the people who are still around, because I think as veterans, especially, we always think of what could we have done, but also as veterans, we need to understand that if someone's going to do something, they're going to do it. Like all those signs that they tell you about in school, that they don't exist.
No, usually in my experience, I've lost 3 guys from my unit in the last few years, and they're some of the toughest guys you'll ever meet, and they're not asking for help. They're not showing the signs you think that you would normally see. So it's a lot to take in. As a soldier, as a NCO, that those were my guys, and I felt responsible, and that's hard to separate yourself from that. But at the end of the day, all we can do is try to find our own team. I tell veterans that all the time. When you get out, find some fellow veterans, and surround yourself. At least make some connections. Go out and have a beer, or go for hikes like I do once every year with a couple of old veterans, and that way you can feel some sense of normalcy because you joined a group that is different, and you were made differently, so you're never going to fit back in completely, and that's just a reality. And I think people try to fight that, and I think you almost just need to embrace it. You were made differently, and you're not going to be normal anymore.
Right, and no one's going to think some of those jokes are funny.
No. And I think that's
Except
the
other veterans.
that's the hardest part, is knowing, that's why you need those veterans, because you can do some of that dark humor that you can't when you go to work in human resources like I do now, so knowing when to let Staff Sergeant Scott out of the box and when to keep him in the box is something you have to learn yourself.
Absolutely. So you do your time in the reserves, you get out. Where are you working at this point?
So as soon as I got out of the reserves, I started doing my master's program in human resources at Michigan State. So I wasn't working at all. I went full-time in my master's program, finished that in a year and a half. And then I went to work in veterans mental health with Mid-State Health Network. Mostly they work in the Medicaid system, but I was working to help veterans get connected with their benefits and get mental health treatment wherever possible.
Okay. And what else? What from there? Because I know where you're at now. I'm just trying to figure out how you got there.
So, I actually loved working in that area, the veterans mental health, but I won't lie, losing 2 guys back to back for suicide took a toll on me. And at the same time, COVID hit, and I was like, I can't sit at home while veterans are popping themselves, and I decided to get out of that area just because I think it was weighing too much on me. Mm-hmm. So I ended up becoming a leadership training specialist at Glambia Nutritionals, building on my HR background, my training background that I had in the military as well. And then I quickly realized I didn't love working in the factory, even on the salary side of things. So I only worked there for 2 years. Now I work at Greenstone Farm Credit System. I think the cultures there is fantastic, and I think I've definitely found my home there.
Yeah, interesting statistic, HR guy. Did you know that 50% of veterans who get out of the military leave their first job in the first year?
I've heard that before because I used to work with a guy named Mike Poima in InvestVets, and we talked about the difficulty transition that veterans have. And when I go back to, I came home and I was stamping out parts. I was not qualified for anything. I had done some of the coolest things on earth. I jumped out of airplanes. I blew things up. I fought in a war. I've been awarded a Bronze Star medal. I mean, to me, I was like, I had gone from the top of the world to now the only thing I am qualified for is pressing parts in a factory. And I hated every minute of it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me that other veterans have the same kind of experience. Whatever they did in the military, it's better than pressing parts.
So somebody there's a cartoon somewhere that it's got a guy and it says, PTSD is knowing that you're never going to be as badass as you once were.
Yeah.
Because when you're in combat and you're doing those things and when you're in that whole arena, I liken it to being a rock star. And then you come home and you're like from hero to zero because no one gives a shit. Like, they're nice. They thank you for your service, but nobody cares about all that stuff that you did.
No,
to a certain extent.
And I think you're spot on there. And even if you didn't serve in combat, just being in Germany, the training we did, the things we experienced even before I went to combat, you've done something so much more than other people will ever experience. And then you come back and it's like, this is my life. Seriously.
Well, yeah, that's true. And think about how young a lot of our veterans are. Like you said, you came home at 21. You had already lived a whole life experience, really. Yeah.
And you're indoctrinated into this whole new culture. I mean, the military is built on indoctrinating you into its culture, and 18 to 21, you're so impressionable, so I still to this day say there's always a piece of me that's a soldier. And you said before you do so many cool things at a young age, and you're almost at like the apex of what you're ever going to do at a young age. It's kind of like you got the opportunity to play in the NFL and then you got injured and you can't play football anymore. So who am I now?
Right.
What do I do? And I feel like whether you're a soldier, Marine, Air Force, Navy, sailor, who are you once you leave the military? And I think there's almost like a little identity crisis there because, you're not Sergeant Scott anymore. You have to find out who Michael Scott is and how is he going to survive in this world that doesn't make sense.
Right. And find people who understand your experience too. I think that's key. So you're working at Greenstone now. How's the family? What's going on with all of these folks?
Oh, the family's good. I've been blessed. I think over the years, seeking education and trying to figure out my own stuff has been good for me. But my wife has grown a lot as well. I said she's an attorney. She now is in-house counsel at MSU-FCU. My daughter finished her degree as a physician assistant just a few years ago. So she's out in California, fluent in Spanish, which she didn't get from me, but she's just doing fantastic. So when I look back at all the rough times when I first came home from Desert Storm, I feel completely blessed about where me and my family are now.
Yeah, and rightly so. So we've covered a lot of ground in the last 2.5 or so hours. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you wanted to cover?
No, I think, mostly when I'm talking to other veterans, I really encourage them to find their team, whether it's former guys you were in the military with or just some old Vietnam veteran you met at the lunch table. Find somebody that gets you and understands you. Because to your point, you can't talk about certain things in the workplace. Nobody wants to hear about the real things that happened in the war. When you start talking about dogs eating dead bodies, it doesn't sit well with people.
Right.
And I laugh about that a little bit, but it's just the reality of it. Nobody wants to hear it. So it shouldn't be a normal conversation, but you also shouldn't bury it inside and just pretend it never happened because I don't know, I carried it for years and I never spoke about it and it just, it'll eat you up inside. So you got to find your team that you can have a little dark humor with, that you can go disconnect and just have some fun and be as normal as you can because every day in HR, I can't talk about those things.
No, that's frowned on.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's some great advice for folks out there. So I appreciate you taking the time out to sit down and share your story with us. And just thanks for being here, Michael.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
That's a wrap for this episode of the Veterans Archives podcast. We truly appreciate you taking the time to listen and honor the incredible stories of our nation's heroes. Don't forget, you can catch us every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern on Wreaths Across America Radio, or stream past episodes anytime on Buzzsprout, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and as I've said before, any place you can find a podcast, you can find the Veterans Archives podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share our content on YouTube and Facebook and TikTok and Instagram and across all social media. Every share helps us reach more people and preserve more stories. The Veterans Archives podcast is a nonprofit initiative, and our mission is simple: to give veterans a voice and ensure their stories are never forgotten. This service is completely free for veterans because their sacrifices deserve to be recognized and remembered. You want to help? Follow us, spread the word, and if you know a veteran with a story to tell, send them our way. Visit us at veteransarchives.org to learn more about how you can get involved. Thanks again for tuning in, and most importantly, thank you to all the veterans and their families for their service and sacrifice. Until next time, take care, and we will see you on the next episode of the Veterans Archives podcast.